Here we are at the New York State Education website. And starting June of 2025 at the high school level, New York State is going to start changing what is known as the Regents exams from the current curriculum to the next gen science standard curriculum. In this video, what I'd like to do is go over the science and engineering practices that are part of those standards. Try to make sense of them and start thinking about, if you're a teacher, how you're going to implement these into your lesson plans. Hi, my name is Lauren McCarthy, and I was a high school chemistry and for about 8 years physics teacher on Long Island. I am New York State certified in chemistry, physics, biology, and general science, and while I have retired from full-time teaching, I still like to get involved with science and education and helping out students and teachers. So here we go. What you're looking at here are the New York State Science Learning Standards. We're starting here at page 1. And these PEs, as they're called, performance expectations, that are in black, are what the students need to know, and they have to be able to do different things with these expectations. And that is addressed here below in these different colors. Science and engineering practices, which I'm going to explain in this video, your disciplinary core ideas, which is your science information, and then cross-cutting concept. Each one of these I'm addressing in a different video, and then I'm going to try to put them together, show you how I would work with them in developing lesson plans for these new standards. I do want to point out, all over this document, you can see that it's referring to this framework for K through 12 science education. You see it right here on page 1. If I scroll down, you see it here also at the bottom. And what I realized is I'm not exactly sure what the purpose, I kind of can guess what the purposes are of these practices, but I wanted to do a deeper dive for myself and then for you. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. Of course, the first thing that any of us would do would be to put the title, a framework for K through 12 science education, in our search bar. And I look at this and I go, oh no, I got to pay for this book. Well, you scroll down and we're going to go ahead and click here. And what I realized is you can actually download the document for free, or you can read it for free online, or you can buy the book. If it's free, it's from me. When you go ahead and download it, what we're going to check out, first of all, I'm downloading as a guest. You do have to put in your email address, but you can download specific chapters and not the entire book if you don't want. What we want to do is check out the science and engineering practices chapter. What we're interested in is chapter 3, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. Here it is. And what we're looking at is the scientific and engineering practices, better known as Dimension 1. Now, why are they called practices instead of skills? From reading this chapter, what the authors are trying to do is to minimize the tendency to reduce any scientific practices to just a single set of procedures. Think of the scientific method. That's not the only way that we tackle things in science, and certainly not in engineering. Other practices would include modeling, critiquing, communicating, developing explanations, evaluating, and defending one's stance. How are we going to integrate this into inquiry and design for the classroom? Here, these 8 practices are listed for teachers to implement into their lesson plans, for students to think more as scientists and engineers. And personally, if it's me and I'm lesson planning, I'm going to make sure I have all 8 printed out and stuck on a wall, so I can make sure I pull down and go ahead and put in my lesson planning what students are addressing at what part of my lessons or the unit overall. Now this figure, I also think I would print out and stick on the wall next to my 8 practices. So these are activities that students are going to do, so they're kind of acting as if they're scientists and or engineers when they're going ahead and asking questions, solving problems. You'll notice that with the double arrows that you can move back and forth between this whole idea of investigating, evaluating, and then developing explanations and solutions. You don't have to follow everything through either. Maybe you design a lesson that's just talking about observations, or one where you give the students data and they're going to go ahead and critique that data or analyze that data and write some sort of report, or maybe have to defend that data somehow based on what their conclusions are. You're going to have to get creative. It is looking at things a little bit differently. In the last several years, in most of my chem classes, I pretty much skipped over the scientific method because while we would discuss it, we were doing labs where they weren't really based on using those steps specifically. This chapter also goes over how engineering and science differ. We want to relay that, of course, to our students. Of course, both are creative, both use several different methods, and also can be systematic, right? A series of steps. With science, studies may be undertaken for the practice purposes and driven by answering a question, while on the other hand, engineering is usually driven by practical application. That is something that we want to point out to our students throughout the year. The 8 practices that were earlier in the chapter are now being broken up from a science perspective versus an engineering perspective. And we're going to be charged, the teachers, with making sure that we're covering these practices both from the scientific mind and the engineering mind. And then finally, after you look at the science perspective and the engineering perspective for these 8 practices, the practices are even discussed further. And you see that here. What I found interesting and what I would specifically be looking at are the goals. As a high school teacher, I predominantly taught 10th through 12th graders. So here, what the students should be able to do by the time they're ending high school would be important to me. And I would try as best I can going through the 8 practices and then the goals underneath each of the 8 to then see what maybe I could incorporate into different lessons at different times. Maybe even work backwards. Take one of the goals from one of these practices. For example, if I just scroll down and let's look at the math here. Here. Recognize dimensional quantities and use appropriate units in scientific applications or mathematical formulas and graphs. Well, that totally is in line with physics and chemistry. From there, I might make sure that when we're doing some sort of mathematical formula or we're doing graphs, or maybe the students have to do graphs, that we remember this goal. It's a lot at first. I understand that. It's monumental. But I can tell you, if you go back and take a look at this chapter, you'll get a better handle on what you're looking to do when it comes to your lesson planning. I hope this was a little bit helpful. And if you haven't subscribed already to my channel, I would love it if you would. I'm going to be making more videos regarding the science standards, the new standards. The bio and earth science tests in New York State will be changing as of June 2025, and then chemistry and physics to follow the following year. No matter what, I wish you the best, good luck, and keep moving forward.